Hey guys, good afternoon. We're going to start the second day of the endocrine system today, and we're going to cover the all the endocrine glands in the body, their secretion, their action, their regulation. So first, let's start with the main gland, the highest of the highest gland, endocrine gland in our body is which gland?
Pituitary?
Even before that,
Hypothalamus.
hypothalamus. Okay, so hypothalamus is the master of the master gland, and sorry, the master gland is the pituitary gland, but hypothalamus is the master of the pituitary gland. Okay, hypothalamus releasing and inhibiting hormones. And these releasing and inhibiting hormones release or inhibit the anterior pituitary hormones. Okay, so it is axis, like here you have hypothalamus here, this area releasing or inhibiting hormone that comes here to the anterior pituitary, and then anterior pituitary release trophic hormones. That trophic hormones then get into blood and activates or other endocrine glands in the body. Then other endocrine glands release other hormones. Are you following me? So you have to keep in mind this all the time. So that is hypothalamus. The anterior pituitary gland release trophic hormone. Sometimes we call tropic, just tropic. Okay. So if we take the analogy of the manager, assistant manager, and worker, who is the manager among hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and other endocrine glands like thyroid, adrenal gland, and other glands? So who is the manager?
Hypothalamus.
Hypothalamus. Anterior pituitary is assistant manager. And for example, another endocrine gland like thyroid gland is the worker, which works, release hormone, and those release hormones then act on the target cells. Okay, so that is the basic information. No matter which hormone, they all have link to your brain, which is hypothalamus, and then it comes. That's why this is neurohormonal regulation of our body. Okay, so our body maintains homeostasis by two systems, that is nervous system and the endocrine system. So the pituitary gland is the extension of the hypothalamus, and the stalk, the neck which connect the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus is called pituitary stalk, and the medial eminence part of the hypothalamus contains the neuron, and these neurons make the releasing and inhibiting hormone in their cell body, and through the axons, then they bring to a capillary that is called the the uh, hypothalamo hypophyseal portal system. First capillaries, primary capillaries, then they drain it through the veins, through the in the pituitary stalk, and then it release the hormone into another second bed of the capillaries. So when you find any second bed, two beds of capillaries in the body, that is called portal system. Like in liver, we have hepatoportal system, hepatic portal system, and here in the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus, we call them hypophyseal portal system. Okay, so pituitary gland is located beneath the hypothalamus, under the hypothalamus. Which bone holds pituitary gland? Can you imagine where is pituitary gland in your body? Some of you have taken anatomy and you
Yeah,
must know that.
Is it
yeah.
the
Is it
sphenoid?
void or spin?
Yes, it sits on. So here, if you draw a straight line from both side of your ear and from your nose, where these 3 points meets at the base of your skull, which is made by the floor of sphenoid bone, and on the top of a sphenoid bone there is a cavity called sella turcica. This pituitary gland lies on that sella turcica, and the size of this pituitary gland is like a pea size. Okay, so these pituitary gland at the base, TRH, TSH, T3, and T4 for thyroid gland. So these pituitary gland produce like several releasing hormones. And one example I have given here, like the thyroid releasing hormone coming from these cell bodies, then release here as hormone, then get into capillaries. That comes to the anterior pituitary. You see anterior pituitary cells has receptor for TRH here. These anterior pituitary cells then produce another trophic hormone, which is called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. That hormone then enters these capillaries and then goes all over the body, but they have receptor only in the thyroid gland. So thyroid, they will act on the thyroid gland, then thyroid gland will produce the hormone T3 and T4 for the thyroid gland. And you can give similar example for all other glands, like how it works from the hypothalamus to the bottom gland. Okay, so based on the influence from the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary gland makes its own hormone, whereas posterior pituitary gland do not synthesize its hormone. What does it do? We'll see in another diagram. Hypothalamus makes hormone and directly bring here and stored here in the posterior pituitary. Okay, so that is the okay. So that is the what happened. Sometimes okay. So the developmentally anterior pituitary is called adenohypophysis because they are glandular in structure. They develop from the same tissue where epithelial tissue develop from, because they are glands, they produce their own hormone. Whereas posterior pituitary is just extension of the neurons, and they are neuron-like. That's why we call them posterior lobe of the pituitary neurohypophysis. So anterior is adenohypophysis, posterior is neurohypophysis, anterior produce its own trophic hormones, whereas posterior only store the hormone. Okay, infundibulum connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. So you see here, posterior pituitary is not making its hormone. What happens? There is neuron cell bodies. We call them nuclei in the brain, you know. So there is group of nuclei here. One group of nuclei is called paraventricle nuclei. Another is called supraoptic because they are above the optic chiasm. That's why we call them supraoptic nuclei. These two group of nuclei, supraoptic nuclei produce ADH. ADH means anti-diuretic hormone, and paraventricular nucleus, which is on the side of the, the third ventricle, that is producing oxytocin. So ADH and oxytocin is produced here in these two nuclei. And then through these axons then brought here, released in these capillaries and stored here. When it needed, it is released into blood. Okay, so that is two hormones. Let's see what are the function of these two hormones. It will come, I think, where it will come again, I believe. Yeah, here it is. We're going to talk about there. Okay, now the anterior pituitary, when inhibiting or releasing hormone coming from the hypothalamus, then it acts on the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary then produce 6 major trophic hormone. They secrete 6 trophic hormones that increase and maintain the size of these glands and activate these glands to produce the hormones or help these cells to increase their size. Okay, if there is, why we call them trophic hormones? Trophic means feeding. They are not feeding, they are increasing their size. That's why if you cut, let's say if you cut prolactin hormone, the mammary gland will not be there. Mammary gland will be shrinking and there will be no milk production. Okay, if you cut off growth hormone, bone, muscle, adipose tissue, body mass, everything will be shrink, and that is called atrophy. Atrophy, absence of trophy. Okay, so 6 hormone produced by anterior pituitary are prolactin, which has receptor on the breast, the mammary glands, particularly ducts and the alveolus of the mammary gland. Growth hormone from the anterior pituitary, which acts on, their receptors are on the adipose cells, muscle cells, bone cells, and they increase their mitosis, they increase their intake of protein and increase their size. Then another hormone is TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which has receptor on the thyroid gland cells, thyroid follicular cells. They activate these cells, they produce thyroid hormone, which is T3 and T4. Another anterior pituitary hormone is ACTH, that is called hormones, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. That means it is acting on the outer side cortex of the adrenal gland, ACTH. And then this ACTH, once act on the adrenal cortex produce several hormones. And we're going to talk about that in detail later. Okay. Okay. There is another hormone from the anterior pituitary, which is called gonadotropins. And gonadotropin is released under the influence of gonadotropin releasing hormone. So GnRH, let me write down here. So what are the hypothalamic hormone for here? So for prolactin is prolactin releasing hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone from hypothalamus, thyroid releasing hormone, thyroid inhibiting hormone, then adrenocorticotrophic releasing hormone, they're inhibiting hormone, Similarly, gonadotrophin releasing hormone and gonadotrophin inhibiting hormone. Okay, so gonadotrophin hormone, which is single gonadotropin hormone, a gonadotropin releasing hormone from hypothalamus, acts on the anterior pituitary, which produce two hormones, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And these hormones have receptors on the gonads, ovary in female and testis in male. Follicle stimulating hormone, both in ovary and testis, increase their size, stimulate ovulation and sperm formation, whereas luteinizing hormone helps in release of egg and helps in production and activation of testosterone hormone in the testis. Okay, so let's see another example how in the female menstruation cycle and ovulation is maintained. Again, you think from the brain. So anybody, if you are following me, if hypothalamus is the master and we are going from the hypothalamus to the gonads, what is the releasing hormone from the hypothalamus?
Gonadotropin releasing hormone.
Very good. Who said that?
Ryan.
Ryan, I want to talk to you today after the class, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So, uh, from the hypothalamus and gonad axis, write down in your note hypothalamic gonadal axis. So first we produce GnRH that will go and act on anterior pituitary, then anterior pituitary will produce gonadotropins, which is FSH and LH, and then that will act on the ovary and testis. So ovary will produce estrogen and progesterone, and testis will produce testosterone. And then these hormones in female, estrogen and progesterone will regulate menstruation cycle and ovulation. And that's the cycle of female is maintained. So if you take these hormones from outside, which is found in the pill, that will inhibit this gonadotropin and also acts on the gonads and the reproductive organs. And that's how contraception works. We're going to talk about that again. Okay. So these are the anterior pituitary hormones. Growth hormone promotes growth, protein synthesis, and movement of amino acid into cells. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates thyroid to produce and secrete T3 and T4. Adrenocorticotrophic hormone, ACTH, stimulates adrenal cortex to secrete cortisol and aldosterone. Follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, stimulates growth of ovarian follicles and sperm production. Luteinizing hormone, LH, causes ovulation and secretion of testosterone in the testis. Prolactin stimulates milk production by increasing the size of the alveolus and the ducts in the breast. Okay, so anterior pituitary. Release of anterior pituitary hormone is controlled by hypothalamic releasing and inhibiting factors and by feedback from the levels of target hormones. So let's see here. Releasing and inhibiting hormone from hypothalamus are released from axon ending the, we talked about median eminence, and carried by hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system to the anterior pituitary in the capillary bed, diffuse into anterior pituitary and regulate secretion of its hormone. This is repeat of the same thing. So here you go, one example. Feedback control of anterior pituitary or any hormone, how it is controlled. So hypothalamus release gonadotrophin releasing hormone, GnRH, which has receptor on anterior pituitary cells. In response, anterior pituitary cells then produce gonadotrophin, follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone that has receptor on gonads, and in response, gonads, testis and ovary will produce sex steroid hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Once these hormones are in normal concentration in blood, then it gives negative feedback either to the hypothalamus or to the anterior pituitary. And then this mechanism then from here switch off, and that's how we maintain. Once it goes below normal, then again hypothalamus start releasing gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Okay, so hypothalamic, so let's see when you take pills contains oral contraceptive pills contains low dose of estrogen and progesterone. When you take that low dose hormones in the form of pills, what happens? It is getting into your blood instead of coming from your body and inhibiting hypothalamus, inhibiting anterior pituitary, and inhibiting these hormones. And at the same time, these hormones have action on the cervix, uterus, fallopian tube, the vaginal secretion. They act on them all against the conception or transport of the egg. And that's why there is inhibition of the conception. Okay. So the hypothalamic pituitary gonad axis control system involves short feedback loop, which retrograde flow of blood and hormones from anterior pituitary to hypothalamus, inhibits secretion or releasing hormones, and involves negative feedback target gland hormones. There is one time where there is positive feedback, that is during the LH production. So when there is more LH, there is more estrogen. More estrogen cause more LH. And these two, the cycle of these two hormones continues till egg is released from the ovary. And that's the only thing where there is positive feedback. Otherwise, all hormone in the body is controlled by negative feedback loop. Okay. So that means if hypothalamus is the main homeostatic organ in our body, which is controlling the anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary, and those pituitary glands then controlling our body, that means hypothalamus is controlled by whom? By the higher brain, like cerebral cortex, other parts of the brain. So higher brain is the master, is the main organ which is controlling everything of the body. That means if your higher brain is affected due to any reason, that will affect your hypothalamus, that would affect your anterior pituitary. Ultimately, that will affect your endocrine glands and the function of tissues in your body. So that's the global effect if you have change in the brain. Are you following me? So for example, if you want to be with good libido and reproductive age, fertile, then you need to calm your brain. Your brain should be not under stress. Your cerebral cortex should not be under stress. If your brain is under stress, that can drop the effect all the way from the brain to the body through the endocrine system. Okay, because hypothalamus receives input from higher brain center that can affect anterior pituitary secretion. That's why emotional states and psychological states can affect pretty much everything in your body. Sleep cycle, which is called circadian rhythm, menstruation cycle, and adrenal hormone, your mood, your mind, your memory, your body mass index, everything. Okay? That's why be happy. Posterior pituitary stores and releases two hormones produced in the hypothalamus. That is antidiuretic hormone, ADH, whose name is arginine vasopressin. Sometimes we call, because they are made from one amino acid called arginine vasopressin. So what is the function of antidiuretic hormone? In the kidney, we have done that. Antidiuretic hormone, once there is increased osmolality of your blood, that is detected by your receptor, osmoreceptor in the hypothalamus, and then hypothalamus release ADH. ADH take out water from your collecting duct and dilute your blood. That's the function of antidiuretic hormone. It absorbs water from your renal tubules, collecting duct. So if you increase your volume of blood and reduce the urine, you are increasing blood pressure or decreasing blood pressure?
Increasing blood pressure.
Increasing blood pressure. So the another name for the antidiuretic hormone is vasopressin. Vasopressin also constrict blood vessel, which also increase blood pressure. So both hormone, antidiuretic and vasopressin, together constrict blood vessel, increase volume, and increase your blood pressure. Another hormone is called oxytocin, which is stored in posterior pituitary. And its function is the increased contraction of uterus during childbirth. After the childbirth, oxytocin also contract mammary gland alveoli and duct, which help in milk ejection reflex. Oxytocin is released from which part? From the hypothalamus. Yes. So when baby puts mouth around the nipple of the breast, through the sensory neuron, the sensation goes to brain, from the brain your hypothalamus, and that release more oxytocin, and that contract more myoepithelial cells and the alveoli of the mammary gland, and increase the milk letting effect reflex. So more you breastfeed, more you milk produce. Let's say after childbirth, if you stop breastfeeding the baby, let's say start the bottle feeding of the baby, then slowly milk production is suppressed. And if you breastfeed, then more oxytocin. That is the effect in the female. Oxytocin has noted that oxytocin is increased in both male and female during sexual intercourse, particularly during the orgasm. That means this hormone is highly associated with the affection and the kindness and then intimate relationship. So that's why more oxytocin, more breastfeeding, more oxytocin, more bonding between the baby and mother. This hormone has also been seen increased in people who are kind, who are seeing kind thing, who are like empathic, those people. That's why another name for this hormone is love hormone. Okay.
So oxytocin is for the milk ejection, but prolactin is for milk production, right?
Yes. Prolactin is for milk production. Okay. So this is the all in the first part. Let's go to the second part and let's see how much we can do today. Okay, so next hormone we're going to talk today in second part is adrenal gland, thyroid gland, gonads, and pancreas. Okay. So adrenal gland, and before we go to adrenal gland, what is the releasing hormone and a stimulating hormone from anterior pituitary for this gland?
Adrenal corticotropic.
Adrenocorticotropic from anterior pituitary. What is from the hypothalamus?
Thyroid stimulating hormone.
This is adrenal gland.
Hormone releasing.
CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. CRH, okay? So CRH released from the hypothalamus that acts on anterior pituitary that produce this hormone. That's why you have to be careful in this. There is a lot of terminologies. It's always tougher. And then anterior pituitary release adrenocorticotrophic hormone, ACTH. Okay? And ACTH then acts on the outside of the adrenal cortex. So let's see here now, adrenal gland. Adrenal gland sits on top of the kidney bilateral. So we have two adrenal gland. If you give a the transverse longitudinal section through the adrenal gland, you're going to see there is adrenal cortex outside of the adrenal gland, and there is adrenal medulla. Adrenal cortex is like anterior pituitary. They are glandular in structure, and adrenal medulla is like posterior pituitary. They are modified postganglionic neuron. So adrenal medulla acts like postganglionic sympathetic neurons. That's why adrenal medulla release two hormones which are like neurotransmitter. They are epinephrine and norepinephrine, whereas adrenal cortex have totally different hormone. Okay. Now, let's see the histology of adrenal cortex. It has outer connective tissue. You see the square here, box. So the outermost area is the connective tissue. Then if you go slightly deep, then you have the adrenal cortex, and then innermost you have adrenal medulla. Now, adrenal cortex has three regions. They are zones, first, second, third zones. First zone, which is outermost zone, is called zona glomerulosa. Middle zone, which is the thickest zone, is called zona fasciculata, and the innermost zone of the cortex is called zona reticularis. Are you following me? And these three zones have different hormones produced by them. Let's talk about adrenal medulla, and then we will talk about adrenal the cortex. So adrenal medulla, as I said, is modified postganglionic sympathetic neuron. Medulla synthesizes and secrete 18% of epinephrine and 20% norepinephrine. And they are controlled by sympathetic division of autonomic nervous system because they are themselves postganglionic sympathetic neuron modified. And that's why they are controlled by preganglionic sympathetic nervous system. Are you following me? That's why I always say the nervous system, the physiology. You have to remember everything what you learn every day to understand the next thing in a right way. The cortex is controlled by adrenocorticotrophic hormone from the anterior pituitary and CRH, corticotrophin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Cortisol, which inhibits glucose utilization and stimulates glucogenesis, that is produced from the cortex, and aldosterone, which stimulates kidney to reabsorb sodium and potassium. So let's see here. Three hormones. Adrenal cortex. Zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. Which one is the outermost?
Zone
Glomerulosa.
glomerulosa.
Zona glomerulosa, and reticularis is the innermost. This is towards the medulla. So you can see adrenal hormones are corticosteroid hormones, and they are steroid hormones. That means they are made from fat. They are made from cholesterol. So you see cholesterol, then pregnenolone, progesterone, deoxycorticosterone, corticosterone, aldosterone, And this aldosterone is called mineralocorticoids. The next layer is zona fascicularis that also use cholesterol and the same stage, and they make two major hormones, corticosterone and cortisol, and these are together called glucocorticoids. The inner layer takes the same cholesterol and their derivative like 17 hydroxypregnenolone, and then they make dehydroepiandrosterone, DHEA, androstenedione, and other androgens, which are like later estrogen, other androgens they are made. Okay, androgen-like hormone, and these are sex steroids. So let's see what is the function of mineralocorticoid, aldosterone. Aldosterone, or which is the mineralocorticoids, it has receptor on the collecting duct, cortical collecting duct. It has receptor on large intestine. And what they do, they actively take sodium from those tubules, those cells, and put into your blood. And then by osmosis, you follow the water and then chloride. That's why they absorb salt. Okay, so outermost part of the adrenal cortex absorb salt, helping absorption of salt. Glucocorticoid, by name, what do you think this hormone works with? Glucose. Cortisone and cortisol. These hormones help in increasing the blood glucose. It works just against the insulin. Okay, so during the stress, these hormones bring more glucose, so your brain can use more glucose. That is the function of this hormone. So this increase your blood glucose, metabolize or maintain your blood glucose. Sex steroid helps with human sexuality. They change these hormones from the zona reticularis. The secondary sex steroids help in making female body like female, male body like male, external genitalia, body mass change like male, and it also stimulates, augment the function of other testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone hormones. Okay, so this is, and you see every step has enzymes. And if somebody has, let's see, here enzyme deficiency, what happens? You will not make this. If somebody has enzyme deficiency here, let's see, from 70 hydroxyprogesterone, and then they make sex steroids. And if this enzyme is deficient, you will not make sex steroid. What will happen? These people will have like normal male or female inside ovary and internal organ, but physical feature outside will not be like male or female. Female will be like male and male will be like female. So inside you are female, male, but outside your body feature, external genitalia will be like male. And that happens a lot of due to deficiency of this enzyme. And people will not, the guy inside male and outside female will not look like guy, will not behave like a guy. Okay, so this is the hormone from the adrenal cortex. To remember, I will say, you see, deeper you go, sweeter you find. Mineralocorticoids, salty, glucocorticoids, sugar, and sex steroids, even sweeter. That's why we say the adrenal cortex produce the hormone in the basis of their action. They are deeper you go, sweeter you find. Okay. Adrenal medulla produce the hormone epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine lasts 10 times longer than norepinephrine. Okay. And they are innervated by preganglionic sympathetic fibers. These hormone, what is what controls the release of adrenal medullary hormones? Sympathetic nervous system. When sympathetic nervous system is activated, it will release sympathetic neurotransmitter, as well as it will also activate adrenal medulla and will release these two hormones, which, by the way, are also neurotransmitters. Okay, what they do all action, whatever is done by the sympathetic stimulation, increase respiratory rate, increase heart rate, cardiac output, vasoconstriction, increase blood pressure, venous return, breakdown of fat, breakdown of glucose, breakdown of lipids, all are the function of adrenal medullary. Okay. So what is the association of stress and adrenal gland? Let's see, in your work condition, there is non-specific stress in relationship, work condition, or maybe something else. And that stress is affecting your higher brain center. Like you are always under stress due to work, due to relationship, due to some disease condition. What does that do? That will affect your hypothalamus. And you know, then hypothalamus, with response to stress, what does hypothalamus release? Increase CRH. CRH is corticotrophin releasing hormone. That corticotrophin releasing hormone then acts on anterior pituitary. Then anterior pituitary will produce increased amount of ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, that will bind on adrenal cortex, on those three layers of the adrenal cortex, and they will produce several hormones. Among them, one will be cortisol, and cortisol is produced by which layer? Outer, middle, or inner? Short term memory test.
Middle.
Middle one. And then cortisol has several effects. It increases your blood glucose, which can cause diabetes type 2. It has anti-inflammatory effect. It has the it inhibits the hippocampus, that can cause memory. It has effect on your blood vessel that can cause increased blood pressure, and that's so this condition is called general adaptation syndrome, gas syndrome, and this is due to increased ACTH and cortisol release. Sorry. Okay. So that is the chronic stress and this activity. It also, chronic stress can induce high level of cortisol that can cause a number of negative effects. For example, atrophy of hippocampus, which is involved in your memory. You will have insulin resistance, which is diabetes type 2. It will inhibit your vagus nerve activity, and that will affect your GI tract, digestion, everything pretty much. If you have inhibition of vagus nerve, suppression of growth hormone, thyroid hormone, gonadotropin, and that can affect your sexual life. Next gland is thyroid gland. Again, thyroid gland, what is the releasing hormone from hypothalamus? TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, that act on the anterior pituitary, which produce a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. That hormone acts on the seal-safe thyroid gland, and that produce thyroid hormone. So thyroid gland is located just below your neck, and this gland produce two hormones, T3 and T4. T3 is triiodothyronine. And T4 is tetraiodothyronine. So in the hormone, if there is three iodine, because thyroid hormone contains iodine. So if there is three iodine, then we call them triiodothyronine. If there is four, then we call them tetraiodothyronine. Okay. So they secrete T3 and T4, and they maintain our facial metabolic rate, BMR. And that's why thyroid gland is needed for growth and development of our whole body, because receptor for thyroid gland is on pretty much every cell in the body. It has receptor on every cell in the body, and that's why this hormone changes the function actions of each cell in the body. Okay, here you can see this is the scan, iodine scan, radioactive iodine scan of the thyroid gland. You can see the right lobe, left lobe is smaller in this individual. Okay, so thyroid gland is made up of thyroid, microscopic thyroid follicles. What do you mean by follicles? Let me draw here. Follicles are like, let's see, you have cells, group of cells surrounded in circle. So if you have a group of cells around a lumen, this is the lumen, then we call them follicles. So such follicles are a lot in the thyroid gland. Each lobe of the thyroid gland has follicles, group of cells, and these cells makes hormone put into these lumen where there is fluid, and from there then through the exocytosis these cell again release into blood vessel nearby. Okay, so thyroid gland consists of microscopic thyroid follicles. Outer layer is follicle cell that synthesize T4, interior filled with colloid, a protein rich fluid. I'm going to show you in the diagram. Now I'm going to read it. Okay, so here you go. So here is one follicles in the thyroid. You have thousands of follicles, such follicle. Okay, so what is follicle? Follicle is the group of cuboidal cells. And you know, thyroid glands synthesize thyroid hormone using iodine. Before we go over by step, I want you to note certain things. So these follicular cells synthesize thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin means protein synthesized by folic acid. So what are those thyroglobulin? Globulins are the protein, yes? And proteins are made up of amino acid. And one of the amino acid is tyrosine. So these thyroglobulin here, which is produced by these follicular cells. This is the thyroglobulin produced by these follicular cells. This thyroglobulin is made up of tyrosine. Okay, the chain of tyrosine and other amino acids. First get that. And inside this lumen, there is thyroglobulin and there is liquid, fluid, rich in other protein molecules, water. That is called colloid. Now, when we eat iodine in our meal from the source like vegetables, the thyroid then takes iodide in the thyroid follicles through the active process using ATP. And this is iodine in plasma. From the plasma is taken outside, and then from outside, when it enters the colloid, there is another enzyme inside the colloid that is called perioxidase, that the oxidize the iodide into iodine. Okay, And now iodine then binds with, attached to the amino acid in thyroglobulin that is called tyrosine. So if we add one iodine on the thyroglobulin, then we call them monoiodotyrosine because we are adding one iodine to the amino acid tyrosine. If we add two iodine, then we call them diiodotyrosine. So in this process, we are making a lot of monoiodotyrosine and a lot of diiodotyrosine. Now, when one monoiodotyrosine and one diiodotyrosine mix together, join together with the help of enzymes, then we call them, they have three iodines. So we call them triiodothyronine or triiodothyronine. And if you add one diiodotyrosine, diiodotyrosine, then that is called tetraiodothyronine. And they are stored inside these thyroglobulin, bound to thyroglobulin inside. Are you following me? So they make this and then attach to these thyroglobulin. Once thyroid stimulating hormone comes from the thyroid stimulating hormone from anterior pituitary, they have receptor on the thyroid follicle cells. They bind with this and activate this cell to release this T3 and T4 outside. When it releases, most of the hormones are T4, very few are T3. T4 are inactive hormone and T3 are active hormone. Sometimes this T4 get into the cell, target cell, and then it turn into T3, active hormone. Okay, so this is how thyroid hormone is synthesized. So if you see here, you have hypothalamus, thyroid releasing hormone, anterior pituitary, TSH, thyroid gland. If you have adequate iodine, then you make T3 and T4, and concentration of this T3 and T4 give negative feedback to anterior pituitary and maintain normal thyroid hormone all the time in the body. And if it is an inadequate, then what happens? There is no negative feedback. You will cut down this negative feedback. If there is no negative feedback, that means anterior pituitary will think, oh, I'm not producing TSH, and thyroid gland is not producing T3 and T3. So anterior pituitary will making more TSH. Thyroid hormone gland will act, increase in size, but there is no iodine, so they cannot make T3 and T4. And that's how thyroid gland increase in size, and that is called hypertrophy of thyroid gland, that is called goiter. Okay, that's why when you have low T3 and T4, that is hypothyroid, and when you have high, then we call them hyperthyroid. And hypothyroid, in hypothyroid case, what will be high? TSH will be high or low? It will be usually high. That's why thyroid gland test is always with the TSH, which is the primary test.
So how does Hashimoto's work?
We will come there when there is hyperthyroidism. So Hashimoto's are like, you have thyroid gland, there is autoimmune, which is killing your thyroid gland. Okay. Okay, so disease of the thyroid, hypothyroid, people with inadequate T3 and T4 levels. So basic function of the thyroid gland is to produce heat to maintain basal metabolic rate of each and every cell's metabolism. That means if you have low thyroid, that means you are cold. If you have high, then you are hot. Okay, so hypothyroid have low BMR, and that's why you are not using energy. So you get weight, lethargy, cold intolerance. You will be feeling cold all the time. And then there is puffy face, hands and feet due to accumulation of mucus-like things under the subcutaneous tissue, and that is called mixed edema. If you have deficiency during the pregnancy, during the childbirth, then the baby will be highly severely affected from the mental status, and that is called severe mental retardation or cretinism. So the mother with hypothyroid will give the baby which will be severely mental retard. If there is high thyroid, that is called hyperthyroid, and you will be pretty much hot with the hyperthyroid. And how this happens mostly? This happens when your hyperthyroid gland, the thyroid gland is making a lot of thyroid hormone. Like if you have inflammation of the thyroid gland, your thyroid gland will make more thyroid hormone, and that will be acute. Sometimes your body produce antibodies, which is like TSH hormone. Then what happens? TSH is not coming from anterior pituitary, it is coming from some tumor in the body, or your body is making itself somewhere, and that is activating your thyroid gland all the time to produce more thyroid hormone. And that condition is called Graves' disease. And Graves' disease has characteristic the protrusion of eyeball, and that is called exophthalmos. And those individuals with Graves' disease will have also weight loss, heat intolerance, irritability, high BMR, and sweating all the time, diarrhea. Okay, so here is the characteristic of them. Parathyroid glands are the 4 glands posterior side of the thyroid gland. These are small, and these parathyroid gland absorb calcium from your kidney as well as from your small intestine, and that increase your bone mass. So parathyroid gland produce parathyroid hormone in response to low calcium in your blood. So whenever you have low calcium, your parathyroid gland will produce parathyroid hormone to increase blood calcium by absorption of calcium from the pancreas, from the kidney and the small intestine. So you see, decrease blood calcium, parathyroid hormone, from the bone, dissolution of calcium and increase blood calcium, from the kidney, increase reabsorption, from the GI tract, which is not here, increase reabsorption, and then that gives negative feedback mechanism. Pancreas had islets. Only 10% of pancreas have islets. 90% are exocrine, and they have alpha and beta cell. They produce insulin and glucagon, and insulin is released in response to high glucose. Okay, that's why insulin increase the uptake of glucose by muscle cell, fat cell, and liver cells, whereas alpha cell secrete glucagon in response to low blood glucose, and that activates glycogenolysis and lipolysis, so they increase the secretion of these hormones. Okay, I think that's all. I'm just wrapping it up. Okay, guys, thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much.